Okay, so today we're going to talk about inverse linear functions. Inverse linear functions. And so now we're going to actually define what is known as an inverse relation. So if you want to go ahead and get that down, I'm going to go ahead and pass out something that you will use today during your notes.
Did we skip lesson 6?
Yes, we did. Just record that. If you are wondering, there is not a typo. We are in fact skipping lesson 6. So an inverse relation is defined as a set of ordered pairs obtained by exchanging the x-coordinates with the y-coordinates. So when we think about an inverse relation, all we think about doing is flipping. Exchanging the x-coordinates with the y-coordinates. So if you look at the following, it says find the inverse of each relation. So we've got a first one right there. So to find the inverse of this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the x's and the y's. That's all you do.
That's pretty easy.
So then my next point will be negative 19, 7. My next point will be 17, negative 5. And my next point will be 11, negative 3. So notice all I did, switch, 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 switch. That's all you do to find the inverse. You flip them. Okay. So far so good?
Yes.
Okay. Let's look at the next slide. I want you to go ahead and do that real quick. Shouldn't take you very long. Go ahead and find the inverse of that relation. So what is the very first point?
8, 6, negative 6.
8, negative 6. That's my very first point. Can somebody tell me what point 2 will be?
11, negative 15.
11, negative 15. Very good. What will point 3 be?
3, 9.
3, 9. And last but not least, what will point 4 be?
6, 0.
6, 0. Now notice, when you write these, you need to make sure you use parentheses and commas. You also need to make sure you use the braces. That is those little squiggles. Okay, so don't forget to put those as well. So let's go ahead and look at the next one. It says graph the inverse of the relation. Now this is the sheet I gave you, and the reason why I gave you is so that you could actually be able to graph this as well. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of do the same thing we just got done doing in the problem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick some points out. So if I pick a point that this goes through, would you agree that this point right here goes through the blue line?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the coordinates of that point?
That would be negative 4, 2.
Negative 4, 2. So if I'm going to graph the inverse of that, the inverse will go through what point?
2, 4.
2, negative 4.
Two,
So I'm going to
negative
go over here to 2, negative 4, and I'm going to put a dot. Now I need to pick another point that the line goes through. What would be another point?
Next to that arrow.
The x-intercept.
This one right here. And what are the coordinates of that point?
2, 0.
2, 0. So if the blue line goes through point 2, 0, what would my inverse go through the point?
0, 2.
0, 2. So you see how that works? So now all I need to do is connect those points. And so when I connect those points with a line, I will go ahead and have what the graph of the inverse looks like. Okay, I'm gonna have to kind of switch that one around a little bit. Looks like I got a little off. There we go. So that one's a little bit better. So that's how you graph the inverse relation. Not too bad. You pick any 2 points. Now, I would have needed to use those 2 points. I could have used, another point I could have used is I could have used this point. I could have used this point. Okay, you just have to pick 2. So what I want you to do now is I want you to go ahead and complete this one. Okay, graph the inverse of that relation. So pick any 2 points, flip them, and then draw the graph.
Taking a bus.
All right, so what is a point that my new line will go through?
1, 0.
0, 1.
0, 1 is a point because 0, 1 is the inverse of this point right here. Can somebody tell me another point that my line will go through?
0, negative 2.
Ne-
Oh, negative 2, 0.
Negative 4, what'd you say, Kelsey? Negative 4, negative 1 will be another one. That's from the point negative 1, 4, which is right here. I heard somebody say something with a negative 2. That should have been negative 2, 0, because that's the inverse of this point right here. Okay, and so then now what I need to do is just connect those dots. And so when I connect those dots, you should notice that your graph intersects at that point. So, not too bad. So we can write them algebraically, we can do those graphically. And so then now what we're going to do is we're actually, oops, skipped it. There we go. We are actually going to find an inverse function. And so this is the notation that I use. Whenever I'm writing an inverse function, that kind of looks like a negative 1 power, but it doesn't mean a negative 1 power. It means the inverse. And so if I'm going to write an inverse function, I'm going to write it this way. And that's red, F inverse X. When you see this, it means F inverse X. Now here are the steps. You have these written down on your sheet of paper, so you don't actually have to write those down. To find the inverse function, the very first step, we're going to replace F of X with Y. So all that means is where I see F of X, I'm going to write the letter Y. Step 2, switch X and Y. Step 3, we're going to solve the equation for Y. And then finally, we're going to replace Y with F inverse X. So the very first step, okay, and you can write this along with me, I'm going to replace F of X with Y. Oh, I see F of X here. I'm going to put Y. Oops, I'll make sure I have my pen first. I'm going to make sure I write Y. That's step 1. That's it. Step 2, what did it say?
Switch X and Y.
Switch X and Y. So where I see Y, I put X. Where I see X, I put Y. That's step 2.
So excited.
Now step 3, what does it say?
Solve the
Solve
equation.
Y.
Solve for Y. So real quick again, solve for Y. So that means I want to get this right here all by itself.
Add 8.
So the very first thing I need to do here is add 8. So on the left side, what do you have?
X plus 8.
X plus 8 equals what?
4Y.
4y. So now remember my utmost goal, solve for y. So what do I need to do now? Divide by 4. So on the left side, I now have x plus 8 divided by 4 equals what?
One.
Y. So I've done the third step. I have solved for y. The fourth and final step says what?
Replace
Y with F.
Replace y with f inverse of x. So all I'm going to do is in place of y, I'm going to put f inverse of x. So I've got x plus 8 over 4 equals f inverse of x. That's it. Now, could I have written it the other way? F inverse x equals x plus 8 divided by 4? Yeah. But that is your final answer. So that is the inverse function. Not too bad. We've got 2 more we're going to go through just to make sure that these are crystal clear in your mind. So let's go ahead and look at this one. So once again, we're going to go through the 4 steps. First step, replace f of x with y. So you should have y equals negative 1/2 x plus 11. Second step is to do what, folks?
Switch X and Y.
Switch the x and the y. So x equals negative 1/2 y plus 11. Third step is to
Solve for Y.
solve for y. So that means I want to get this right here all by itself. What do you do first? Subtract 11. Very good. So I end up with x minus 11 equals negative 1/2 y. What do you do now?
Put it, no, you put it over,
Multiply by 2.
Multiply by negative 2.
-2.
Now, for those of you that are wondering about dividing by negative 1/2, you can, but you're going to have to simplify it anyway. So we're going to multiply both sides by negative 2. Biggest thing to remember here is that your x minus 11 needs to be in parentheses. Okay, over here on the left side, the negative 2's are going to cancel, and then the negatives will cancel, and you're going to be left with y. Now, could you distribute the negative 2? Yeah, but you don't need to. Okay, you can leave it alone. Final step is to do replace y with f inverse of x. So, negative 2 times x minus 11 equals f inverse of x. That is an acceptable answer. If you chose to multiply the negative 2 out, another acceptable answer would have been negative 2x plus 22. Either of those is acceptable, doesn't matter which one. Now, which one would I probably prefer? This one. Why? Because you don't run the risk of making a mistake when you're simplifying. Okay, let's look at the last one. I want you to go ahead and try this one on your own. This is the very last one today, very first steps. Replace f of x with y. Switch x and y. Solve for y. And replace y with f inverse of x. Alrighty, saw a lot of good things. Saw a lot of good things as I went around. Your inverse function should be 3 times the quantity, x plus 7. You could also write that as 3x plus 21. and either of those is acceptable. So once again, we looked at how you do an inverse with ordered pairs. We looked at how you find an inverse with a graph, and we looked at how you find an inverse with an equation.
Can you have those two switched?
So those are,
What do you mean?
oh, F inverse? What?
No, can you have those two like switched? Like, can you have 3 times x plus 7 equals f?
Yeah. So your assignment then, oops,
Ooh,
for some reason it's skipping today. Oh my goodness.
But we don't have.
There we
any
go.
standard.
Pages 267 through 268, 8 through 19, 22 through 31. Tomorrow, I would probably expect a short quiz. A short quiz tomorrow.
Are you taking ours on Monday or?